Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Michael Zuber, one rental at a time, back with his Monday guest, Mr. Greg Dickerson. How you doing, sir?
Doing fantastic, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I wanted to reach out and see what your crystal ball says, because I think it was a month, maybe 6-8 weeks ago, you called kind of the floor in the Bitcoin market. I want to say it was 36,000, and it went back up, and you nailed that one. I'm just curious, have you had a chance to look at what's going on today? Because it seems to be not really looking at it, but it seems to be deflating. Are we in a downtrend, or what do you think is going on in the Bitcoin and crypto market?
Yeah. So we've been in a downtrend since, November. And that was where Thanksgiving at my house, I was telling everybody, don't buy, don't buy. Time to get out, where everybody else is telling their family, buy, it's time to get in, it's going to the moon. So,
Yeah.
I was totally opposite. So as you and I have been talking in all of our videos, we called the top back in, November, the great deleveraging, the great repricing. I'm now calling it the great repricing. So we've done the deleveraging. Now we're repricing.
Okay.
So, Bitcoin is a risk asset. A lot of people look at it as a hedge against inflation. They thought it was a, monetary system, all these different, ideologies and philosophies about Bitcoin. At the end of the day, investors view it as a risk asset. So it's a highly speculative risk asset. Occasionally it leads the markets. Sometimes it follows the markets, but it's tracking the markets. So in terms of, where Bitcoin is going, you have to look at traditional markets and what's going on with the Fed. And that's where it's kind of hooked right now, until you get broader scale adoption, more people coming into the space, more users and things like that. You get some regulation in the space that kind of, lays some ground rules for exchanges and stable coins and things like that. It's going to continue as a highly speculative risk asset until it matures a little bit, gets a little bit more stability underneath of it, a little bit more broad scale adoption where people can kind of rely on the value of it. Then it can become that store of value, which is one of the narratives of what it was created for. Initially, it was created as an alternative to fiat and supposed to replace it and all that. That's not going to replace money, as we know. It's not going to replace the dollar. It just isn't possible for that to happen. Governments aren't going to let that happen. Now, people might use it, and that's fine, but as a reserve currency, it's just not going to happen. Wow. Governments are putting it on their balance sheets around the world, but it's very small governments, and they're testing those experiments, and there's some states trying to legalize Bitcoin as an official currency in their state and recognize it as a legal tender and things like that. So there's some experiments going on with it, and those things could happen. But as far as a reserve currency of a global superpower, that's not happening. Yeah. And you have not just the United States, but a lot of countries around the world that just aren't going to let that happen. So, in terms of where it's going, from a price standpoint, it's in a consolidation phase right now. It's down off of its peak, and it's been in a downtrend for several months, and it's kind of bouncing around and ranging, testing some of those lower areas. Like what I had anticipated was it was going to bottom out around that 35, 36 for this range that we're in right now, retrace a little bit, and then roll over to more of a longer, sustained, consolidated down market before the next bull run. And what has interrupted that is two things: the Fed coming out with policy change and policy narrative, and then of course, the potential conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Investors are starting to take more risk off the table and things like that. So that's kind of interrupted the cycle that we were in and the price action that we've been tracking. So right now, there's so much uncertainty out there. Nobody knows what we're going to see in the near term. Long term, I think it'll get back and test some of those highs again. I just don't know when that is going to happen, because there's just so much uncertainty until we get guidance from the Fed and they actually do something instead of talk. We don't know how that's going to affect markets and what that reaction is going to look like. But Bitcoin is doing like everything else. It's pricing in all this uncertainty right now. And what a lot of people were surprised by is the fact that it's not its own thing. It is a risk asset. It's like a tech stock, and it's joined at the hip with the NASDAQ.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Again, I'm a casual observer with 1% of his net worth in the space, and a lot of things that I was told a year ago when I started looking at it and placed a couple of little bets was it was an inflation hedge. Not really. And it was a non-correlated asset. Boy, it is correlated. Again, one guy's opinion. So very interesting.
Yeah, and the inflation hedge argument, people look at the lifetime. Okay, if you go back to Bitcoin's existence over it started at nothing and pennies and then dollar. So yeah, that's great, but you got to look at it now. Okay. At 30,000, at 40,000, is it an inflation hedge? And where does it go from here? What does the appreciation cycle look like, and how stable is it going to be? And, arguably gold was supposed to be a hedge against inflation, and gold's volatile,
Yeah.
So the problem is there's so much, with futures and, ETFs and options and things like that, all these assets are just highly speculative. They're highly manipulated. And, that's just what you're going to see in these markets. And Bitcoin's kind of fallen into that. And the more broad scale adoption it gets, the more regulation that comes into the market, into the environment, the more of that is, it's going to happen, but it'll stabilize somewhat to where you can start to get confidence that it's not going to drop down to, 10,000 or 5,000. It's going to stay at a certain level, but how far will it go? Nobody really knows. And there's all kinds of price projections. What I do know is the top was 69. That's the highest it's been. The bottom in the last two worst situations possible was about 3,500 and 4,500 at the two bear market bottoms, March 2020 and then 2018, 2019 before that. So to me, that's your floor. I don't see it. It ain't going to zero. It's not going away, but I don't see it ever getting below that if in the worst case scenario.
Okay.
And I do see it retesting that 69,000 at some point to see if it can get beyond that. So I do feel comfortable. And that's kind of the range we're in right now. We're in a range of about 29 to 30,000 to 70. That's kind of what it's doing.
Yeah. The low that I've seen since I've been in was that 29,000. Is that you think that's a decent support level, or do you think it's going to be down to, because I've heard crypto winter, right? 80% loss of value, which would take it to what, if 70,000 for rough math is, so that would be a 14,000 floor. Which one do you think is a more solid floor, the 30 or the 14?
So, that's what Bitcoin's done all three times, all four times, 2013, 2017, well, we haven't gotten there yet, but the last couple of cycles, it has drawn down 70, 80%. It has a tendency to do that.
Okay.
Back in June, July of 2021, when you and I were tracking it, it looked like it was going to do that. It looked like it was heading down to that 20,000, then 10. It didn't get below 29,000.
Right.
There's a lot of structural market support, meaning buyers that have been put in at that 30,000 level. So it's going to be extremely difficult. And it's going to take some very strong headwinds for it to ever get below that level.
Okay.
But, it did in March of 2020, it cracked it, of course, it had only been up to 20,000 before that. It never got to 69. So right now it looks like 30 is a major market structural support. If it cracks that, 20 is a huge market, structural support it has to get through because that was your previous all-time high. And I think it would take a severe economic event for that to happen. That's kind of how I view it. I think that for me, that's a macro floor right now.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, that was fun to watch you nail it last time. We will see what's going on. Greg, where can people find you?
Yeah, gregdickerson.com. My YouTube channel podcast is there, and all my social media links. Go check it out.
All right. Thank you, buddy.